CNN legal analyst and criminal defense attorney Mark Geragos, also Neil Bruntrager, he's general counsel for the St. Louis Police Officers Association. Neil, you think there are some important reasons not to release the police officer's name at this point? I know you think that. What are those reasons?
I do, Wolf. There are several, but let's start with officer safety. First and foremost, you have to make sure that this officer is safe. That's the bottom line. And that's true for everybody, and that's a blanket rule. The second part of this is that this piece of information, like any other piece of information, should be kept until the investigation is done. That's to protect the integrity of the investigation itself. Now, in terms of the name and in terms of the disclosure of the name, you've seen, and I know you're aware of the fact that there's been a great deal of information that has been hacked. There's been a lot of social media information out there. There have been all sorts of things that have been floated out there. But the moment you put a police officer's name out there, that police officer becomes a target. And that is the primary reason why you would simply never release the name yet. Now, there's a time for everything, Wolf, and that time has not yet come. There will come a time when I think that name will be public, but we're not there yet.
So you agree with that, Mark?
Well, I couldn't agree less with Neil. I understand that that's the rationale. I get it, officer safety. The fact remains that anybody who is potentially accused of any crime, and I've represented quite a few people in the past who the public has had a great deal of antipathy for, and the police find no problem in not only releasing the name, but saying that they're a person of interest and inviting the public to come forward with more information. Let me tell you something. If the police can't secure this person in 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, let alone 5 days, then the police have a bigger problem than any of us thought. And secondarily, what if the public has information about this officer and prior incidents of excessive force, of him jostling around people on the streets and things like that? Wouldn't that be something that was valuable to the investigation? And this is the reason, I think, when they don't release this information, this is exactly why people suspect that this is anything but a transparent investigation and looks like a cover-up.
All right, Neil, what do you say to that?
Well, many things. So let me start with this. I couldn't, again, disagree with Mark more either. I think we agree on the fact that we disagree. But there are several aspects to what happens when there is a police officer involved in a shooting. The first thing is what we call a credible threat assessment. And so what happens is a department, when a police officer is involved in a shooting, is they look to see what sort of threat is involved with the officer. Why? Because there are people who want revenge. What would be served right now to release that name?
Well, Neil, can I ask you
transparency
something? Neil, let me just ask you one thing. What was served?
Sure,
what is served when somebody has not been arrested yet is a supposed person of interest or a subject of investigation? Why is it that police routinely every day announce who that person is and ask the public if they've got any information? In fact, I was saying last night, CNN's got a program here called The Hunt on Sunday nights where they spend a whole hour talking about that, and that's one of law enforcement's great techniques. Why is it different when it's a cop versus a civilian?
It shouldn't be. And I will tell you, I do the same thing that you do, Mark. I represent police officers who are charged with crimes both in state and federal court. And I think that there should be a situation, these are situations where names shouldn't be released until people are charged. So I'm not advocating a different standard. I've been consistent always throughout my career in that no one's name should be out there until there is a charge. So for officers who are involved in these sort of situations, I do think there are some more compelling circumstances, because it's not just this situation, it's all situations. If in this case you release this name, then you have to do that in every case. And while there are many questions about this case, there are many other instances that are officer-involved shooting situations where there's no question that the officer acted appropriately. So do we put their name out there and say, hey, here's their name? Now, you know, if you've been paying attention to the situation here in Missouri, that they put John Belmar, who's the St. Louis County Police Chief's name, his name was out in the social media. People hacked into his computers. They got into his personal information. They posted pictures of himself and his wife. That is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what people can do. And this idea that they should be able to, within 4 or 5 days, figure out what the threat level is. No, what you do in these situations when you find out that there are these threats is you track them down. You figure out whether these threats are real. And so if it's social media, you're looking at this information, and that when there's hundreds of thousands maybe there's not hundreds of thousands, but when there's tens of thousands, as there have been in this case, how long does that take? That takes
but
a very long time.
the problem
There'll
is,
be a
Neil,
time.
the problem is the public doesn't buy it. The public sees the double standard. You and I do agree there shouldn't be a double standard, but clearly here there is a double standard, and it should not
But
inure
they're
to
not
the
the
officer's
decision.
benefit. Well, except they are. They're the public.
But
They
Mark-
have a public
Mark-
trust.
Neil
But
and
they're
Mark,
not the decision makers. The decision makers are the prosecutors. And so in this instance, putting the name out to the public means nothing other than to expose the officer to needless risk.
Well,
all right, we'll continue this discussion. I'm sure a lot of people will be continuing this discussion. Mark and Neil, guys, thanks very much for joining us. We're going to go back to the streets of Ferguson for the latest on the scene situation when 360